Hello everyone, welcome to Prep B. I'm Sanjana Tiwari and I'm your course instructor for the ARC. So let's just begin this journey and today we'll be solving one RC. The level will be not very difficult, you can just call it moderate. And I'm going to tell you how you can skim through the passages, how you can use point of elimination to choose the right answers. And as we are just beginning, we'll focus on the accuracy, not on the speed. You'll gain speed eventually, so don't worry about that. So just try to see how I'm solving the RC, follow the tricks, and implement them in your mock VRC sectionals, right? So let's get started. So the passage is not very difficult again. It's somewhat related to psychology, and you're going to love it very truly. So let's begin. The person who, with inner conviction, loathless stealing, killing, and assault, may find himself performing these acts with relative ease when commanded by authority. So, what the author is trying to say here is that even when a morally upright person, even when a very good person, someone who believes in morals, ethics, values, all of that, even that person, someone who deeply believes that stealing, killing, or hunting others is wrong, might end up doing those things if someone in power or authority tells them to do so. So, when they are commanded by authority, then they will perform these acts with relative ease, even though they hate all of these mentioned acts like stealing, killing, assault, all of these. But when someone in authority commands them to do, they can do it very easily. So this shows how powerful authority can be, right? It can override our own beliefs, our own values. Now, behavior that is unthinkable in an individual who is acting of his own violation may be executed without hesitation when carried out under orders. So again, the same line that if a person is acting on their own choice, they may never do something that harmful. However, if they are doing it upon order, they'll do it very quickly without giving it much thought. So orders can reduce the weight of moral decision making, right? So again, repetition of the same idea. An act carried out under command is psychologically of a profoundly different character than spontaneous action. So here the author is saying that if you are doing something under order, under a command, then psychologically you think different than what you're doing it when you're taking decision yourself. So from a psychological perspective, following orders feels very much different from making a personal decision. So people might feel less guilty, less responsible when they are obeying someone rather than just acting by their own judgment. All right. So the first paragraph is all about this, that when you're doing something wrong under a command, then it is very easy for you to do. You'll feel less guilty, right? Now, the important task from the standpoint of a psychological study of obedience is to be able to take conceptions of authority and translate them into personal experience. So now the author is telling what we have to do. What is an important task for us? So psychologists studying obedience need to move beyond theory and understand how people actually experience and respond to authority in real life situation. So the key to study how people feel, think, and act when faced with authority in practice is something that we have to do now. It is one thing to talk in abstract terms about the respective rights of an individual and of authority. It is quite another to examine a moral choice in a real situation. So discussing freedom versus authority in theory might be very easy. But when someone is given a tough situation, when they are given a moral choice, where they have to choose between obeying and what is right, then it is a very tricky situation. So real life decisions that test our values, unlike what is theoretical. We all know about philosophic problems of freedom and authority, but in every case where the problem is not merely academic, there is a real person who must obey or disobey authority. So here, the author is trying to say that we all have heard about debates when it comes to authority and freedom, but in real life somebody is making a personal choice, to go along with that idea or to go along with that command or not. So it is very much different from just a normal debate or something very theoretical that people have the freedom to choose whatever they are doing. No, actually you have to study how people behave when they are given something to do in a command. So because real life situations, they involves a person not to take a theoretical stand, but also moral decision they have to take. So it's much more complex than we understand, and this has to be studied, right? All musing prior to this moment is mere speculation, and all acts of disobedience are characterized by such a moment of decisive action. So thinking and discussing ideas is just theory until the moment someone must actually act upon that. And in that moment, a person should decide to obey or disobey, right? And uh, going to the next paragraph. When we move to the laboratory, the problem narrows. If an experimenter tells a subject to act with increasing severity against another person, under what conditions will the subject comply? And under what conditions will he disobey? Let's say in lab experiments where researchers test something, when people are told to do something harmful, how far will they go? What will make them stop? This is something that we have to study. What is something that they, if you are increasing severity or something, will they do? Or under what conditions will they start disobeying? What is that line? That the author wants to know. Where do you actually stop? Where do you start disobeying? The laboratory problem is vivid, intense, and real. It is not something apart from life, but carries to an extreme and very logical conclusion certain trends inherent in the ordinary functioning of the social world. So, even though it's done in lab, the situation is very intense, very much real, very much vivid. It reflects how we already see in our daily life. And, all these lab studies, they help us understand real life behavior. Then the question arises as to whether there is any connection between what we have studied in the laboratory and the forms of obedience we have so often deplored throughout history. So we have to ask now, do these experiments explain the horrible things people have done throughout the history just because they were following orders, let's say war or genocide or anything? So, you have to study these things that are, all these things, they have been done only under a command, or what was the reason behind it. The differences in the two situations are, of course, enormous, yet the difference in scale, numbers, and political context may be relatively unimportant as long as certain essential features are retained. So, yes, real life events, lab experiments, they are very much different because, in real life, you take more people, there are more political moves, there are more, large scale impact, and all of that. These situations are very much different, but as long as the basic elements of obedience are there, the comparison can be meaningful. What matters is whether people give up their responsibility to an authority, not the size of an situation, right? To the degree that an absence of compulsion is present, obedience is colored by a cooperative mood. To the degree that the threat of force or punishment against the person is intimated, obedience is compelled by fear. Very important. So, here that the author is trying to say that when people aren't forced and obey willingly, it feels like teamwork or it feels like cooperative mode, right? But if there is a threat, if there is a fear involved, if there is a punishment involved, if the person is getting intimidated, then the person obeys because they are afraid of the punishment. So the reason behind obedience changes the emotional and moral nature of it, right? The major problem for the individual is to recapture control of his own regnant processes once he has committed them to the purpose of others. Once a person gives up control of their actions to follow someone else, it becomes very difficult to take back that control and think independently. The difficulty this entails represents the poignant and in some degree tragic element in the situation, for nothing is bleaker than the sight of a person striving yet not fully able to control his own behavior in a situation of consequence to him. The loss of control, the control that you have given to someone else, is very painful, very tragic, especially when someone tries to do the right thing, but they can't stop obeying, even when it matters deeply to you. Some situation matters deeply to you, yet you're, obeying someone's orders that harms them because you have given that power to the another person. This is very tragic situation, very, painful situation the author is trying to say. Then the last paragraph. The essence of obedience is the fact that a person comes to view himself as the instrument for carrying out another's wishes, and he therefore no longer regards himself as culpable for his actions. So, what the author is saying is when someone obeys another person completely, they start seeing themselves as some kind of tool or a machine for someone else's orders. They do not think that they are doing something wrong. They feel less guilty, less responsible for what they are doing. They take less accountability. They do not feel, culpable for their own actions. Once this critical shift of viewpoint has occurred, once you start thinking like this, that you are not guilty because you are doing it under order, all of the essential features of obedience, the adjustment of thought, the freedom to engage in cruel behavior, and the types of justification experienced by a person, essentially similar whether they occur in a psychological laboratory or in a battlefield, follow. So once a person see themselves as just obeying, as just a machine who is just listening to orders, they begin to justify cruel actions. They change their thinking to fit the situation, and they feel very emotionally distant from their behavior. Whether it happens in lab or in a battlefield, the shift can make people do extraordinary harm. Question of generality, therefore, is not resolved by enumerating all of the manifest differences between the psychological laboratory and other situations, but by carefully constructing a situation that captures the essence of obedience. A situation in which a person gives himself over to authority and no longer views himself as the cause of his own action. So instead of listing the differences between what happens in laboratory or what happens in real life, we should focus on whether the situation captures the true experience of obedience, whether the person hands over control and doesn't see himself responsible anymore, or what is the point at which he starts disobeying. We need to study it. So this is the main essence of the paragraph. Basically, it's just trying to say what happens when we give someone else the control of our life. What happens when you no longer see yourself doing the wrong things because you're doing it under a command, under someone's authority, right? So let's attempt the questions. Let's understand. So I think you got the main idea of the passage, what the author is trying to convey. So I think it will be much more easy for you to attempt the questions. According to the statements, which of the following statement is not false? So they're asking not false, not false. Matlab they are asking what is the true? Or which one is the true statement? People will never commit acts that they judge to be wrong. नहीं बोल रहे कि under authority people do commit. People will always obey those who are in position of authority over them. So people will always, obey those who are in positions. So again, ये जो always आ गया वो थोड़ा extreme हो गया because there was one or two lines where they said that you need to experiment even in the lab. When do they stop saying no? When they start disobeying? What is that line? So always, because of always, you are going to say no to this option. Obedience is not an important subject because it affects only a very limited number of acts. Very wrong. The entire passage is about studying obedience. It is possible to study obedience through laboratory experiment. Yes. The author is trying to say that, although the situations of lab experiment and the war or the battlefield and real life situations are very different. However, you can do the study in the lab. You can see how the people respond to various experiments, what is the line to which they will stop. Obedience is not impacted by a cooperative mode. Sorry for this, cooperative mode. No, obedience is impacted because, when a cooperative mode arises in absence of compulsion is very much stated in the passage. So this is also wrong. D is your option. Now, next question. In the context of the points being made by the author in the passage, the phrase absence of compulsion refers to. So, in the context of points made by the author in the passage, the phrase absence of compulsion. So, there they were saying that, when there is no compulsion, people think that they have the free will, they enjoy doing something that they do. But when compulsion comes in, when there is fear, when you're punished, then even if you don't want to do something, you do it, right? So let's see. The lack of so what does it refers to? Lack of punishment and psychological experiments? No, we are not talking about experiments and lack of punishment anywhere. Obedience that is willingly given to one's superior. So this is the right answer. You're willingly giving your obedience to a superior. You are not if there is punishment involved, if you are intimidated, if there is threat, then you are doing something, right? So that is some obedience you are willingly giving to your superior. Here the author is trying to say if no force is used, people willingly for cooperate. There is voluntary obedience, right? However, obedience something you are giving willingly to your superior and you're following those instructions, then even in the absence of compulsion, you will not do something. There will be voluntary obedience. That is what the author is trying to say. Then the freedom to disobey the orders of those in authority. Here it's about when people choose to obey, when they choose to disobey, but we are not talking about the freedom in general. We are not talking about this freedom. Then, one's ability to consider the moral implications of an act. Here, this is very irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the moral implications with that, right? And then having the free will to do what one wants. This is very generic statement. The passage is more about obedience and not about general freedom or having the free will to do something. And hence, B is your option. Which one of the following findings would serve to most weaken the author's claim in the passage about obedience to authority? So, what weakens the claim? So something, a statement that would say the author is wrong. Let's see. A study that concludes that most obedience to authority is motivated by fear. True. If we say that the statement is true, then it adds to the point that people will do something out of fear. People will, the degree of threat or force of punishment is related to the obedience, right? So this will support the author's claim. He mentions that fear influences obedience when there is no compulsion, right? So this will directly support. So we'll eliminate this option. A is not your answer. A study that demonstrates that most authority figures in government behave immorally. Again, it does not talk about this one. It's irrelevant to how people behave. Again, government behavior, ये सब बहुत irrelevant. A study that shows that most people do not have strongly held ethical values. Now, this is very tricky. This might weaken the author's claim because अगर लोगों के पास ethical values ही नहीं है, तो even when they are not forced to do something or even when they are not commanded to do something, they will do the harmful things. लेकिन यहाँ पे author ये बोलने का he is trying to say that कंपल्शन जब आ जाता है, जब अथॉरिटी आ जाती है, जब कमांड आ जाती है, तब लोग ऐसे ऐसी चीजें करते हैं जो शायद वो नॉर्मल सिचुएशन में ना करें, राइट? एंड इफ पीपल डू नॉट हैव द मोरल वैल्यूज इटसेल्फ, देन पूरा का पूरा स्टेटमेंट, पूरा का पूरा क्लेम जो ऑथर का है दैट दे माइट नॉट डू समथिंग वाला एकदम ही वीकन हो जाता है. सो दिस विल कंसिडर फॉर नाउ. Let's see. A study that asserts that people with a college education are less likely to obey authority. Again, okay, sorry, let's read. Less likely to obey authority figures than those with only high school education. Very irrelevant high school education. एज एजुकेशन की तो बात ही नहीं है ये यहाँ पे तो very irrelevant. A study that proves that fear is an overriding emotion for most human beings. This one is actually supporting the author's claim. He says that fear drives obedience. So this is supporting this one, irrelevant. D irrelevant, B irrelevant, A actually supports. So option क्या होगा? C. You can use POE as well and mark the option C. So that is it. Thank you for listening. We'll come back with the new RC yet again. And stay tuned for more updates. If you have any kind of doubts, any kind of queries, you can just drop a comment in the comment box and I'll be happy to help you. You can join our Telegram channels for more updates. And I'm going to make sure you practice as many RCs as possible, and it will be more than enough. Focus on accuracy now. Again, speed. You'll catch up eventually. And let's make arts your strength. All right. So that is it. I hope the passage was interesting enough for you guys and you learned something new. So thank you again.